H.B. London, who is the pastor to pastors for Focus on the Family, said this. He said there are three important statements for a healthy family that should be made all the time. And if you make them, they'll save your family and your marriage. I'm sorry, I forgive you, and I love you. If we'll use those three statements as needed, when they're needed, in the right time and place that they're needed, there is no faction, no thing that Satan could bring to break up a relationship that can cause that to happen by simply saying, I'm sorry, I messed up, I shouldn't have said that, I should have said something more, or I forgive you for what you have done to me. I love you in spite of yourself. That's what Jesus has said to us. So what do you do? Well, if you've got debts out there to people, things that maybe you borrowed from somebody but you never repaid it, start making arrangements to take care of that. Maybe you have broken promises. You need to go to those people and say, have I made promises to you that I haven't kept? And if they've got an answer that says yes, you need to take care of that. Be careful, because your kids will say, yeah, Dad, I think I remember you promised we were going to Disney World. Not talking about that. Broken promises. Make those things up. People you've controlled in your life. People that you have taken control and you've subverted control over, but God has spoken to your heart and said, you need to back off. Take care of that. People you've lied to, you need to own up. Ask God to help you have the right attitude when you do it, and ask God to give you the right time, because timing is everything. Don't go to a person when they're in the worst moment of their life, in the worst possible time, and say, you wronged me. That's the wrong time. Get it right by having the right attitude and going about it at the right time. And let up on criticism. Everything is not going to be perfect. When the woman who was caught in sin was brought to Jesus, Jesus looked at her accusers at a time when the sin that she had committed was punishable by death and by stoning, by throwing stones until that person was dead. And they were standing there with rocks in their hands, ready, and saying, Jesus, what do you think we should do with this woman? The law says we should stone her to death. And Jesus said, let the person who's without sin cast the first stone. One by one, they started putting their rocks down and walking off, because they knew they weren't that they were all sinners. And then Jesus looks at the woman and he says to her, woman, where are your accusers? And she says, there's none, God, none, Lord. And Jesus says to her, go and sin no more. Now, that's how Jesus responded. If the same woman were brought to us today because of some awful sin, we might say, I can't believe you. How dare you break the commandments of God? God's going to punish you for that. In fact, I may help him. That's the kind of response we would have. But Jesus kindly, what we've been talking about, gently said to her, woman, go and sin no more. And her life was forever changed. Imagine, though, if the other had happened. If Jesus had put his finger in her face and said, I can't believe you are an awful, God-forsaken sinner. You're going to burn in hell. How would she have responded to that? It was with the gentle, kind grace and mercy of God that was God's Son sent down to this earth. That's how we need to respond to others. You see, she had violated the law of God. And yes, the punishment is death for violating the law of God. But Jesus was about to go to the cross of Calvary and about to pay the price for her sins. And that price has already been paid. And anyone can come to the cross. And anyone can get forgiveness. And anyone can find the gentle, free grace and mercy of God without a finger pointed in their face. That's how God works in this New Testament time. And that is how you and I are to work with each other. There's a story told of by a man named Chris Carrier, lived in Coral Gables, Florida. When Chris was just 10 years old, he was abducted by a man who had issues with his family and wanted to hurt his family. And he was kidnapped, he was taken, and the man took this 10-year-old boy and began to burn holes into his body with cigarette butts. Then took him and stabbed him multiple times with an ice pick. Took him out into the Everglades and put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger and left him for dead in the Everglades. He was found, one eye completely blown out, the vision gone. But he survived. He had crippling effects of his injuries. And because he was shot in the head, he had no memory of who it was that had shot him, even though it was a neighbor. It was somebody that he had known. But he had no recall of what had happened. This young man would go on to become a youth pastor at a church. God would use him mightily. 22 years later, a man confesses to the crime and said, "It was me." The man was now 77 years old. The statute of limitations had run out on the crime, and they could not convict him of the crime. Chris Carrier would go and find that man. He would find him in a nursing home, in failing health, with his own eyesight beginning to fail. He wouldn't even tell him who he was. He would go to that man and he would sit down every day with him and read to him. He would begin to share the love of God with him. He would begin to share how Jesus loved him and cared about him. And the day would come when Chris would lead the very man who had tried to kill him to Jesus. And before that man's death, he would come to know Jesus as Lord and as Savior. Now that's grace. That's mercy. That's love. And that's how God showed His love to us. And that's how we must show our love to others. Can a boy of 10 years old who was nearly killed in the most awful of ways, who could show love to his assailant, show us what we need to do to those who've done far less to us? And even more importantly, when Jesus hung on the cross of Calvary, it was you and I who put Him there. The nails in His hands and His feet, the spear in His side, the crown of thorns upon His head. It is we that put Him there. And yet He called out from the cross and He said, "Father, forgive them," because they don't know what they're doing. They don't even understand the circumstances. They don't even understand what's going on. But I forgive them for doing this to me. Jesus would make it possible for you and I to be saved because of what He did on the cross. So what do you and I need to do? We need to admit that our tongue is the problem. And we need to discern rather than judge others. And we need to take the proper steps to repair broken relationships as best we can, whether it's only from one side. But it would be great if it could be from both. You see, when we fail, we need to get up. Don't stay in your failure. Don't stay in the past. Don't keep looking at that monument of the things that have gone wrong and carry that hatred with you. Because God showed His love to you. We must show our love to others. And God will never love you more than He loves you right now. What is the biggest broken relationship in your life?